Library. I'm pleased to have Courtney Lambert with me today from Tech Point to talk about the CoderDojo program. Before we begin, I just had a few housekeeping things. Again, if you're ever interested in staying in touch with the Indiana State Library, we can be contacted through a variety of social media. And this is also another location where we advertise a lot of our upcoming programs or different alternative training resources that are available. If there's ever a time that you want to see if we have any upcoming trainings or like to register for an upcoming webinar or in-person training, you can do that through our events calendar that's located on the Indiana State Library website. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Courtney.
Great. Thanks so much, Amber. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Courtney Lambert, and I currently work with the Tech Point Foundation for Youth. So I've been working in out-of-school time for the past 3 years on lots of different programs, from literacy programs, science programs, math programs, mostly STEM-focused. And for the past year, I've had the privilege of running the CoderDojo Indiana initiative. So I'm here today to talk to you guys a little bit about what a CoderDojo even is, what it looks like, why we think it's a good program, and then how a CoderDojo might work for you at your library. So we'll kind of touch on all of those points. I'll go over what we consider the 5 key steps to starting a CoderDojo, and then we'll open up the floor at the end of this session for any questions you might have, and don't hesitate to ask them, even if you think they're silly. There are no silly questions. So here we go. So I guess the first question that most people ask me is, what is a CoderDojo? The name is a little difficult to say. It sounds a little silly. So CoderDojo is a program that's been around for about 5 years, and it was started by 2 guys in Cork, Ireland in 2011 who noticed that their kids weren't receiving very adequate computer science education at school. And they were both developers, so they said, I don't know, why don't we invite our kids and their friends to come into our co-working space, and we'll just teach them whatever they want to know, whether that's web design or app development, or if they just want to get into some Scratch programming and learn a little bit about, a graphical programming language. Let's just invite them in. It's going to be really casual. We're probably never going to do it again. So 5 years later, the concept has kind of caught on. There's operating CoderDojos following that same model of just inviting students into a safe space for learning computer science on 6 continents in the world. I'm going to tell you my cheesy joke that there's no CoderDojos in Antarctica because there's no kids there. So yeah, it's kind of, I think, you can listen to them speak, and it's just crazy to them that this simple idea that they had to just invite kids in, ask them what they want to know, and then try to help them find the answers to their questions has really caught on and spread across the world. So CoderDojo Foundation, which is the body that's primarily responsible for supporting the CoderDojo movement in the world, is actually headquartered in Dublin, Ireland. And you can see these fun stats on my slide here. There's more than 1,000 CoderDojos operating in the world, and that number grows every day. So this is a really popular program, and kind of jumping ahead to somewhere further along in my presentation, one cool thing in the US is there's been some really cool CoderDojo library partnerships taking place, especially in California and Florida. And so one of the reasons I'm here today is we'd like to replicate that success in Indiana, and I think this is a great opportunity to do that. So we've talked a lot about where CoderDojo comes from, but what is a CoderDojo? Basically, at its core, a CoderDojo is a coding club. We invite kids from 7 to 17, so that's a huge age range, as I'm sure you guys have worked with kids, and that's a huge age range. So we just invite them in, and we ask them what they're interested in. As the world becomes more technologically focused, you can imagine that most kids come in and they're like, I want to learn how to build video games, or I want to make an iPhone app, and those are both kind of huge projects, right? So we usually start a little smaller than that. But in Indiana right now, we have 26 operating CoderDojos, and those are in libraries, they're at schools, community centers, co-working spaces, basically any free venue that the kids can get their hands on that we can invite volunteers into to teach them. And then most of our dojos actually operate with free curriculum that's available online, and we'll get into some of the opportunities for that later on. But yeah, that's the basic structure. It's a pretty free-form program. And so actually on my next slide, because I know the next question people ask me is, what does this even look like? How is this possible? Here are some pictures of our Coder Dojo so you can see kind of what it looks like to be inside one. So we focus a lot on self-directed curriculum. Like I said, we're not a class, and we don't encourage you guys to run a Coder Dojo like a class. We encourage you to really invite the kids in, say, what do you want to know, and teach them a little bit about, just being a person in the world, right? Like I think a lot of kids, when they go to school, there's a very prescriptive learning style that they're encouraged to follow. So they're encouraged, if you have a question, ask an adult and you'll get an answer. And so part of what we try to engender in Coder Dojo is for them to come in and say, I have a question. How do I find the answer? Not do I just walk up to an adult and get an automatic response, but okay, you have a question, we want to teach them. All right, can we Google it? Can we find it in a book? Can we go to the library? Can we call someone up? Can we call a company? And so here you see just a lot of self-directed activities and volunteers and kids having fun together. And yeah, oh, one thing I want to touch on this slide too, I gave this webinar last week and I went through my entire presentation, and at the end of the session, somebody said, okay, you've told us what it is, but why? Why does this matter? And so as you can see, all these kids working together, I think we do work with primarily self-directed activities, but what we really see as the why of Coder Dojo is teaching these kids that they're not the only one in their community or in their school that's interested in this stuff, and supporting them and finding out more. So we encourage the kids to work together on team-oriented projects, and I like to tell the story of a kid that I met just last week who came to my Coder Dojo at the Speakeasy in Broad Ripple, which is a co-working space, and he had never met any other kids that were interested in what he was interested in. You could see his face when he came in and he saw other kids working on Scratch programming, working on a Khan Academy course. He just was blown away. And his mom talked to me after the session, and she was like, it was just so incredible. Even though all the kids are working on their own projects, like these were his people. And we finally found them, and he came, and even just to watch him over that 2-hour session open up and start talking with other kids and getting really passionate and excited about what he was learning. That's the why of why we think this program matters, and why we hope that you guys might consider doing something like this or something similar in your library, because as the world does, like I said, become more technologically focused, these skills are going to be really important for us to give to our kids. So let's jump into it. I'll tell you a little bit about CoderDojo Indiana. So I mentioned that CoderDojo is headquartered currently in Dublin, Ireland. So CoderDojo Indiana is a regional affiliate of CoderDojo Foundation. It's a partnership between TechPoint Foundation for Youth and CoderDojo. And our goal is to support, grow, and sustain the CoderDojo movement in Indiana. And we do that in a few different ways. So we do a lot of fundraising. We try to secure strategic partners both on the statewide level and on the local level. So I do a lot of work with some of our new sites, just helping them identify key partners in their community and figure out how to approach those people and how to get them involved. And then just organization. I'm sure that most of you have worked with volunteers before, and they're wonderful and great, and they sometimes need a little direction. So we try to provide that. And then just before we get into how we started Coder Dojo, I did want to touch on some of the strengths that we see in libraries as partners for Coder Dojo and why we think there's such a great opportunity. So listed down here, you see a lot of things that our other sites struggle with, especially our co-working spaces who don't have built-in student populations. Libraries, you guys have student and parent connections and people already coming through your doors. And so in terms of, student marketing and promotion that we'll talk about later, that's an inherent strength that a lot of my current sites, we work a lot on it because they need to develop that, whereas that's something that a library already has. Libraries already have staff support sometimes for regular youth programming, access to computer labs and technology, and also good reputations in the community. I hope that most of you have those. And that's something that, it's not that my sites have bad reputations in the community, but they do have to work to establish a reputation at all. Whereas when a library is advertising something, I think a lot of parents really, they connect with that and they say, this is a safe place for me to send my kid. Whereas the Speakeasy and Broad Ripple, I am going to let you guys know they do have a couple open kegs of beer in there. So that's a little challenge. But all right, so the first step to making your library a Coder Dojo, if you still think that's something you're interested in, is volunteer recruitment. So I mentioned before, these coding clubs are volunteer-led. So I think, it's a little backwards to some people when they think of this being the first step. They're like, shouldn't I establish all of the rules for my program first and figure out everything I want to do and then recruit my volunteers? And what we say, kind of the other way around, is that you really want to recruit your volunteers first, because this program, hopefully, so that it's most sustainable for you, is going to be run by your volunteers, and they are going to be coming up with a lot of the curriculum and the ideas that make the program run. And so we want to make sure, before you go through all of the other steps, that you have people that are going to support you in doing this. And also, so this is a generic slide, except for the library word, but something I've talked about with the Indianapolis Public Library is they also are providing a staff person to support their new CoderDojo. So if that's something that's, within your capacity to do, and this is something you want to do, I think that's a great idea, but it's not necessarily necessary. So a few great sources of local volunteers, and this is something, if you're interested in, we do support volunteer recruitment. We have a lot of experience with it, so we'd be willing to work with you on reaching out in your community. Library patrons, something that struck a lot of communities I've worked with in the past year is how many people they actually had in their network who had computer programming experience, and they just had no idea because they had never asked them. We had a great conversation with someone from Lafayette about that. She was like, I had no idea that the guy that was sitting in the coffee shop when I was getting my coffee every day was working on biochemical cancer research through coding. Didn't know that's what was on his screen. So that was kind of crazy. And then in Indianapolis, especially because of the tech scene, but also out in other parts of the state, local companies can be a great source of support. I've actually had some great salespeople come through who've been great volunteers in my Coder Dojos. So you'll see on the other side of the screen, one of the most important volunteer skills that is not listed is coding expertise. So also making sure that you consider in your volunteer recruitment, volunteers do not have to know how to code. One of my most successful volunteers has had his dojo running for 2 years, and he does not know how to program a computer. So the most important volunteer skills of these people that you're looking for are that they're patient and flexible, and they like working with kids, and they're willing to work alongside the kids. Something I mentioned to Amber before we started this presentation is my background is actually in psychology, so I am not a coder. When I go out to my programs and I'm working with the kids, I'm truly learning alongside them, and that's, you want somebody with some development experience eventually, but I think that's also a valuable thing to be showing students, that you do not have to be an expert to do this stuff, and that sometimes it's okay to just jump in head first and figure it out as you go. And then another great local volunteer recruitment resource that we've discovered that I didn't even expect is your local Chamber of Commerce or Economic Development Council or anybody in that realm. So something that's kind of come up over the past few months is that a Coder Dojo is really good workforce development cell for these people. So telling them, these are 21st century skills, these are things that our kids need to be learning. Can you help us support that? Has been a really good angle to take with those folks. So the second step, after you recruit your volunteers to making your library a Coder Dojo, would be scheduling. So we have 2 basic models in Indiana of Coder Dojo scheduling that have worked with varying levels of success at different sites. So a lot of our school sites and people that already have kind of out of school time, after school programming running, is the weekly model, has been very popular for them. So in the weekly model, your Coder Dojo would meet very often. The meeting duration is usually 1 to 1.5 hours. And you can see here that I've just listed some of the pros and cons. Your students will progress more quickly if you follow a weekly model. They'll probably form stronger bonds with each other and their mentors just because they're seeing them more often. But the weekly model is also a much larger ask of volunteers' time. I have seen more, obviously, volunteer burnout happening much more quickly because they're being asked to come every week. And then, not only are they being asked to come every week, but there's a lot more time required for them to be researching curriculum and setting up their lessons. That really just depends on what your site is already doing. So the weekly model does not work for co-working spaces. It does not work for community centers because they're not usually already running out of school time programming. This is a new thing for them. If you have after school programming that already runs at your library, this might be something for you to consider. The second model, which has been a little more successful, and this is actually the model that a couple other libraries that I'm working with have followed, is the monthly model. And so when your dojo only meets monthly, the duration tends to be longer, so we recommend 2 to 3 hours for the kids to have a chance to really get into some material. It's a much smaller ask for volunteers. It can be easier to sustain, but then there is slower student progress, and there's a little bit less regular attendance because if kids aren't coming every week, they might forget a certain month or their parents are busy. And so it's really, I mean, I don't think that there's one of these models that works better than the other. It's just thinking about what's going to work best, for your site from a sustainability perspective, how much effort and how many volunteers you can mobilize at what frequency in order to keep doing this. Step 3, this is a fun slide. So curriculum research. So after you've determined a schedule for meeting, you've recruited some volunteers, it's time to figure out what you actually want to use. And I hope you can see from this slide that this is a very small sampling of the resources that are out there on the internet, and that's why we recommend, if you're going to start a CoderDojo, that you spend some time just looking at what's out there. So a lot of these logos on this screen are my personal favorite things to use. And if you think about this screen being my personal favorites, which I really only have space for this much stuff in my head at one time, there's just an incredible amount of resources out there that people are publishing every day, trying to make this more accessible for people like you, people like me, and the kids who want to start coding. So this is also a great place, I think, to take a pause, because I know this is a lot of information in one webinar. A lot of these curriculum pieces are things that you could use even if you decide that you don't want to start a CoderDojo. So 2 that I would highlight are code.org, which is that big code, the black and white logo, the big square. Code.org has they have the Hour of Code, if you guys are familiar with that, which happens every December, Computer Science Education Week. A lot of new hours of code are put out that are just 1 hour self-directed activities for kids to try coding. And that's all it takes. They're all online. It's block-based programming. It's very easy to understand. And even as an adult, if you just take 20 minutes and play the game before the kids come in, you can feel pretty confident about it. And then the other resource that I would highlight, I hope you guys are already familiar, but if you're not, is Google CS First, which is it's underneath the CoderDojo logo. It's the big Google logo. Oh, sorry guys, this is my first webinar. I have an arrow. It's this one. Google CS First is a really great curriculum put together by Google, and if you write to Google, you can get a free box of curriculum materials that will include student passports, stickers, and a lesson plan booklet, which the lesson plan is so thorough that it will tell your volunteers or your staff things like walk into the room, turn on the lights, say hello to this. So it's just very, especially if you have people that are nervous about leading something like this for the first time, it's a really great curriculum. Again, it's free, it's online, and those are set up in 6-week modules. I think there's 13 different options for that. So that's just a great resource for you guys to go and check out. But yeah, and those are 2, I'm sure there are many like them that I have yet to hear of. So research your curriculum. Happy to provide advice at any time. Like I said, whether or not you start a CoderDojo, my email will be at the end of this presentation, and we're happy to serve as a resource for that. Step 4, to make your library a CoderDojo. So after you've recruited your volunteers, you've done some curriculum research, you've set a schedule and hopefully a start date, it's time to start thinking about student registration and promotion. And I would say that this step is where a lot of my sites, even if they've done the first 3 steps and they're feeling really confident, they kind of throw their hands up in the air and they're like, how do we tell people this is what we're doing? So these are 3 of the most common ways that people do student registration. I've included some pros and cons as well. The most popular tool worldwide for CoderDojo registration is Eventbrite. It's a really common tool. Parents are familiar with it. I'm sure that you guys are familiar with it, just using it to bring people in and track a lot of information. The only con with Eventbrite is that CoderDojo has some badges that you can award to the kids that are really cute and fun, and Eventbrite is not going to sync with those badges. We'll have to think of a different way to recognize the students for their achievements. And it does require additional login information. I've never had a particular problem with that. I know that there are sites that have, so just something to think about. One really cool tool that I'll highlight in the middle is Zen. So that is the CoderDojo Foundation sponsored student registration tool. It's cool because it will link your site in with a worldwide map of CoderDojos, so you can actually show the students, how they're connected to this movement that spanned the entire globe. It syncs with online badges, so you can provide recognition for students as they master specific skills. And I do think, like I said, it just promotes a sense of belonging, which is really, as a movement, kind of what we're after, because I think there's this stereotype of kids that code, this the skinny white kid in the sweatshirt and the computer screen is reflecting off his face. And so what we really try to promote is this sense of we're all in this together and anybody can code and you don't have to be that person alone in the closet basically in order to learn computer science. And so I think one way that we can do that is by showing them how many other people are also doing that in the world. Some of the cons of Zen and some of the reasons that people choose not to use it is still being worked on. So it's a very new system. It was just, I think they made it public sometime last year. It's gone through 3 different versions in the past month, which can be a pain for parents. It can be a pain for students. And we do understand that, which is why we also put out Eventbrite as a really good option. And then the other thing, kind of I guess would be similar to Eventbrite. I know the Bartholomew County Public Library and a couple other libraries have elected to use their existing registration systems. They already have youth programming, and I think especially for you guys in the library setting, this could be the best option because it keeps all your information in one place. And step 5, we're already there. So step 5 is hosting your first CoderDojo session. So once you have your curriculum, your volunteers, your schedule, and you've got some students registered, you jump in and host your first session. And I've included, my favorite picture is actually this one up here on the top left of these kids. I wanted to show this one. You don't always have to have computer-based activities for the kids at your CoderDojo session, especially if access to computers is a limiting factor for you. So these kids are completing our robot maze, which is a really fun activity that you can set up just with painter's tape on the floor. And one kid is the robot, the other kid is the computer, or the coder, and the coder has to move the robot through the maze with a certain set of commands. But yeah, I think that hosting your first CoderDojo session can be really overwhelming. You feel a little unprepared, you feel like you're jumping into something you don't know how to do, and what I like to tell people is one that I've started over 10 CoderDojos, and even at the 10th starting session, I still felt like that. And it turns out fine. And also, other libraries that I've worked with, other sites that I've worked with will call me the day before their first session and they'll say, can you come down? Like, we just need you to drive out, anything you can do. And so I come for their first session. And then, by the time they get to their second session, I call them and I'm like, hey, are you okay? Do you want me to come and help you out? And they're like, oh, no, we got this. You stay in Indianapolis. We don't need you. So it's just an amazing experience. And like I said, I think one of the most rewarding things about a program like this is seeing those kids, like the little boy that I mentioned earlier who came in and just had found his people. And this was where he needed to be. This is where he belonged and where he could really start to blossom and start to make some friends and also just learn more about the thing that excited him the most. We always like to kind of wrap up this portion of our presentation with this quote from Sheryl Sandberg that myself and other people that I've worked with find really powerful, which is that girls and boys just need the opportunity to learn computer science. And by building technology, you make our world smaller and our future brighter. I think regardless of whether you start a CoderDojo or do a program like this, exposure is just such a big thing at this age. And if you talk to developers and you talk to people that get into programming and you ask them why they didn't do it sooner, it's because they just didn't have the chance. They didn't know it was out there. They weren't exposed to it. So in that spirit, over here, I have some quick links for you to get kids coding. So like I said, even if you don't want to start a CoderDojo, just directing kids to code.org, Google CS First, and then Scratch right here in the middle is a really big one. It's a little bit more fun. It's a little bit more creative. If you have kids that have already done code.org, it's a great place to direct them. And then I'll move this out of the way. At the bottom here, I have my email and my phone number, so please feel free to reach out anytime with questions, either about doing something in the short term or about starting a CoderDojo. I know that a webinar like this is a lot of general information, and there's a lot of specific community concerns that can come up. So we're absolutely happy to work with you in any way.
Thank you so much, Courtney. I was wondering, did anybody have any questions for our presenter? Well, I know one of the things I was kind of curious about was you had mentioned that the length of time of a Coder Dojo was really adaptable, so that some of your institutions were really only working in the summer. Um, is it possible to just do like a one-shot Coder Dojo where maybe like once a year you have like a week-long activity and then that's it?
Absolutely, yeah. And so I think that, I mean, on our side of bookkeeping, we might classify that a little differently, but it's absolutely possible, especially, just depending on the resources that are available to you to make something like this sustainable. That's absolutely possible, and it's something that we would support.
I see that we do have somebody typing a question. Um, so I see you may have covered this, but can you tell us again or more about registering to become a Coder Dojo? So is it just a matter of contacting you or through the TechPoint website?
So you can reach out to me at my email, and I can help you through the process. The official process of registering to become a Coder Dojo takes place on that Zen website. And so it's a really easy registration process. And the reason that we ask you to include us is, like I said, there's more than 1,000 Coder Dojos across the world. And the guy who approves the listings and makes you an official Coder Dojo, I think he told me he gets 500 or more emails every day. So if you contact us, we can call him and get your listing moved up to the front of the line so that you get approved, because they go through and they ask a lot of questions like, do you really mean 1 p.m. or do you mean 1:30? And you're like, well, I wrote 1 p.m. So
Did we have any other questions for Courtney? I know that a lot depends. So Susan asks, I know that a lot depends on the number of computers, but kid volunteer ratio, what kid volunteer ratio do you recommend?
that's a great question. So starting out, the ratio that we usually recommend is 1 volunteer for every 4 students, which I know seems a little high, but what we do see when you have a lot of kids coming into your first few sessions and they don't know anything and they have a lot of questions, they get frustrated very easily. And also, I think, in terms of volunteers' time and not burning out your volunteers, as a volunteer, sometimes in Coder Dojos, if you have 10 kids that all have their hands up and you're supposed to get to all of them, that can be stressful. Once you've established and you have some kids who can maybe help each other out, or you just a little more experience under your belt, you can back off to maybe 1 to 6 or 1 to 7.
Okay, so we have another question for you. So this one is, how to do coding programs in libraries? Okay, no, sorry.
That's okay.
So it sounds like you can offer coding programs without being an official Coder Dojo. So what would be what if any, are the benefits of being an official Coder Dojo versus maybe just participating in an hour of code or doing some more like low-level kind of visual programming?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So I guess this is just my own opinion, but the benefit that I see to associating your coding program with a name, whether it's Coder Dojo or Girls Who Code or one of those names out there, is access to network and resources. And so the reason, especially, I mean, I am a little biased, obviously, but the reason that we recommend Coder Dojo is the Coder Dojo label plays very well with other coding programs. So we have Girls Who Code clubs that also call themselves Coder Dojo, and as a result, they're able to access resources through us. So we have a Coder Dojo Indiana grant fund that we are planning to open in June of this year, and we're actually opening a special round of it next month. Sorry, like I said, we're a very new partnership. So we have a grant fund that you would have access to in order to acquire hardware, software, dojo-related things that you need, even if it's something silly like power cords. We've seen everything from people asking us for 3D printers to people saying, we don't even have a computer lab, can you help us get some laptops? So that would be one benefit. And the other benefit, like I said, just really trying to engender in the kids a sense of belonging to a movement. And making sure they know there are other people out there. I think that by affiliating yourself with a statewide or national program like this, it can help with that sell and help show them that there's a whole world out there that really supports them.
I guess I'm kind of curious, since you have a couple libraries that are already actively engaged in the process and a few more who are like beginning the joining process, are there any kind of network opportunities where libraries who are already engaged in being coder dojos can kind of mentor new libraries who are interested or just kind of curious about learning more?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are actually working on our first Q&A calls. So we have an open call every month, and that includes libraries and also any other site from across the state that just wants to talk to other people that are doing the same thing. And then we've talked about setting something like that up. And I think if we had 2 or 3 more libraries join us, we could definitely work on that. The other two things that we have in the pipeline, we have a hackathon that we're planning to bring everybody involved with CoderDojo across the state, hopefully in next summer. And then we'll be doing a conference as well for people that lead CoderDojo specifically next fall.
Well, this is exciting. Again, thank you so much for agreeing to present for us today. Just wanted to see if anybody had any more questions before we sign off for the day. Okay. So everybody who attended the webinar today will receive a copy of the slide deck that contains Courtney's contact information, as well as some of the other information in the slides. And thank you again for attending. Have a great day.